The death certificate was signed before the sun came up. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Manner of death, accidental fall. The ink dried at 9:17 in the morning. By mid-afternoon, the apartment had been cleared. By the following evening, the file was administratively sealed. 48 hours from body discovery to closure. If you believe cases close because every variable has been measured, stay with this one. Because this case did not close on certainty. It closed on appearance. Her name was Elena Vance. 29 years old. Financial analyst. No criminal record. No prior domestic violence calls to her address. She lived alone on the 11th floor of a renovated industrial high-rise overlooking the river. Open kitchen. Marble island. Polished concrete floors. Clean lines. Minimal clutter. At 12:34 in the morning, a neighbor called emergency services. He reported hearing a heavy thud through the shared wall. Not shouting. Not breaking glass. Just impact. Paramedics arrived within 13 minutes. Elena Vance was found supine on the kitchen floor, head angled toward the island. A wide blood pool beneath her right temple. One heel still on her foot. The other several feet away near the hallway threshold. No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No defensive wounds documented at scene. Alcohol present in an open bottle of wine on the counter. The responding officer wrote, "Scene consistent with fall." Inconsistent. That word would close the case. But consistency without measurement is assumption. 3 weeks later, the file reached Detective Rachel Monroe during a routine internal audit. Rachel did not inherit the case through drama. No anonymous tip. No grieving family demanding justice. It was flagged by time, 48 hours. That was the variable. Violent head trauma cases inside private residences typically required extended review, especially when alcohol was involved and no witnesses were present. This one moved too cleanly. Rachel requested the original photographs. She reviewed them alone in the evidence room. Lights low. Monitor glow reflecting across her face. Cropped denim jacket over fitted dark top. Sleeves pushed up, posture forward. Still, she did not scroll quickly. She studied. Frame 1, Elena's body as found. Supine. Right arm angled awkwardly near torso. Left arm extended slightly outward. Head turned marginally toward the wall. Frame 2, overhead shot of blood pool. Dense central saturation beneath temple. Edges feathering outward. Frame 3, marble island corner. No visible chips. No hair embedded along edge. Clean surface. Frame 4 stopped her. On the drywall adjacent to the island, slightly above counter height, was a thin, curved arc of blood, not a mist, not cast off from a weapon swing. A narrow directional sweep. It began lower, curved upward slightly, then tapered. Rachel enlarged the image. The arc was not wide. It was not chaotic. It was controlled. She activated measurement overlay. Distance from floor to highest point of arc approximately 4 feet, 9 inches. Elena's height 5 feet, 6 inches. If Elena had fallen while standing upright and struck her head on the marble edge, initial impact would occur around temple height, roughly 5 feet or slightly lower depending on posture. Gravity would then draw blood downward, pooling, drip lines, passive flow. But this arc suggested lateral movement while blood was already active. Movement requires force. Rachel reviewed the autopsy report. Single depressed fracture to right temporal bone. Radiating linear fracture extending posteriorly. No skull fragmentation beyond immediate impact zone. No defensive wounds on forearms or palms. Toxicology confirmed moderate alcohol intoxication. Impairment level consistent with reduced coordination. Not unconsciousness. Estimated time of injury between midnight and 2 in the morning. Neighbor heard thud at approximately 12:32. Emergency call logged at 12:34. Paramedics pronounced at 1:03. Rachel replayed the timeline slowly. If Elena slipped and struck the island, she would collapse immediately. Bleeding would begin at impact site and continue while she remained stationary. For the arc to form, her head had to move laterally during active bleeding. Either she attempted to rise, or someone moved her. Rachel zoomed further. There was faint secondary distortion in the primary pool. A subtle drag mark extending 2 to 3 inches toward the hallway. Not dramatic. Not enough to attract attention during rapid scene processing, but present. She advanced to body camera footage from responding paramedics. The footage was routine, controlled urgency. gloves snapping, equipment unpacked. At minute 2, one paramedic shifted position. The camera angle tilted slightly, revealing the lower cabinets beneath the island. One cabinet door stood partially open. In crime scene photographs taken shortly after, all cabinet doors were closed. No log entry documented that change. Rachel paused the footage. Behind the medic's knee, faintly visible on the concrete floor beyond the primary blood pool, was a lighter imprint, almost like the outline of where a knee might have pressed briefly into diluted blood, or where someone had knelt. She rewound, frame by frame, nothing conclusive, but nothing consistent with a simple collapse either. She checked the responding detective's summary. Victim likely fell while intoxicated. No evidence of struggle. No foul play suspected. Likely. Rachel did not close files on likely. She pulled digital records next. Elena's phone activity stopped at 11:58. An incoming text arrived at 12:10 from a contact labeled M. Message content. Are you still up? No reply recorded. No outgoing calls. No emergency attempt. Rachel requested subscriber information. M. Corresponded to Marcus Hale. 32 years old. Investment consultant. Prior romantic relationship with Elena ended approximately 2 months before death. He had been interviewed during original investigation. Statement home alone entire evening. Sent a casual text. Went to sleep. Phone location data placed his device at his residence during relevant window. Rachel requested more granular tower data. Urban high-rise signal reflection can create false stationary impressions within several block radii. She returned to the photographs. The arc. She stood from her chair and replicated approximate geometry in the evidence room. If Elena were upright and struck the marble edge accidentally, head movement post-impact would be minimal unless external force intervened. If someone grabbed her face during bleeding, attempting to steady or reposition, the arc could form exactly as seen. She reopened the autopsy image. There was a faint contusion along the left jawline. Documented as incidental, possibly secondary impact with floor, possibly grip. She circled it. 3 weeks after closure, Rachel walked into Elena Vance's apartment. Management granted access. The unit had not yet been re-leased. The wall had been repainted, fresh coat, slightly brighter tone than adjacent hallway. She approached the section where the arc had been photographed. Gone. Biohazard cleanup explained repainting. She crouched and examined baseboard trim. At the lower edge where roller had not fully reached beneath molding, a thin sliver of older paint remained visible. She measured from floor upward. 4 feet, 9 inches. She stood beside the island and aligned her own temple approximately where Elena's would have been. The marble edge contacted slightly higher. If Elena fell naturally, impact geometry would not align with the arc apex. Unless she had been bent forward. Unless her head was turned during bleed. Unless someone's hands were involved. Rachel stepped back and let 2 scenarios form. Scenario 1, intoxicated slip. Impact. Collapse pooling. No lateral projection. Scenario 2, argument. Physical contact. Push or forced rotation. Impact. Bleeding. Head repositioned. Arc formed. Collapse. Silence. She walked toward the hallway. The missing heel had been documented several feet away near threshold. Momentum could account for displacement, but in the photograph, the heel was upright. Balanced. Placed. She examined entry door. No forced entry. Deadbolt intact, which meant either Elena was alone, or she let someone in. Rachel returned to the center of the kitchen. The city moved quietly outside the windows. She closed her eyes briefly and reconstructed the sequence again. Argument escalating. Financial betrayal perhaps. Physical proximity. A grip at collar. Pull. Impact against marble edge. Bleeding. Hands attempting control. Head turning. Arc forming. Release. Body falling fully to floor. Text message sent. Departure. Accident declared. Case closed. Before this case moves further, consider this: how many deaths appear ordinary because they lack spectacle? How many files close because nothing looks broken? Rachel Monroe reopened the file that afternoon. Status updated from inactive to under review. Marcus Hale would be contacted again, because blood does not curve on a wall without motion, and motion does not occur without cause. Someone had been close enough to Elena Vance to turn her head while she blawed. That meant she had not fallen alone. Marcus Hale arrived voluntarily. He chose a navy blazer. No tie. Open collar. Controlled presentation. Men who believe the past is settled often dress like the future is still negotiable. The interview room camera activated at 10:23 in the morning. Marcus sat upright, ankle resting across knee. Fingers interlaced loosely on the table. Breathing steady. Eye contact direct. Detective Rachel Monroe observed for several seconds before entering. She carried no folder, no photographs, no accusation. Just a legal pad and a pen she did not intend to use immediately. "Thank you for coming in," she said. "Of course," Marcus replied. "I was told the case is being reviewed. I thought everything was already concluded." "It was?" Rachel said. Administratively. A pause. Marcus leaned back slightly. "Is this about the toxicology?" "It's about the timeline." He did not speak. Rachel began where the original investigators had ended. "You stated you were home all night." "Yes." "You texted Elena at 12:10. "Yes." "You did not receive a response." "No." "You went to sleep." "Yes." Rachel watched for micro shifts. Pulse at the neck, jaw compression, breathing rhythm, stable. She slid a printed still across the table. Underground garage footage. Timestamp visible. 11:57. Marcus's vehicle entering Elena's building. He looked at it. "That's my car." "You said you were home." "I was earlier. I stopped by. We argued. I left." "You didn't mention that." "They didn't ask." "They asked if you saw her that night." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't think it mattered. She was alive when I left." Rachel let silence stretch. Silence is pressure without volume. "What time did you leave the apartment?" "Around midnight. Maybe a little after." "You exited the garage at 12:28. He nodded once. "That sounds right." The neighbor reported hearing a heavy impact at approximately 12:32. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair. "I was already driving." "You're certain?" "Wes." Rachel did not confront immediately. Instead, she changed direction, described the argument. "It was emotional. She'd been drinking. She accused me of seeing someone else." "Were you?" "That's not relevant." "It establishes context." He hesitated. "No." "What did she say when you left?" "She told me to get out." "Was she standing?" "Yes." "Where?" "In the kitchen." "Near the island." "Wes." "Was she steady?" "She'd had wine." "But she was upright." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "If she fell immediately after you left, you would have heard it." "Maybe I did." "I don't know. I wasn't listening for that." "You didn't mention hearing anything unusual." "I didn't think I needed to." Rachel nodded once. Then she placed a second photograph on the table. The blood arc. This was documented on the wall. Marcus glanced briefly, then looked away. "I don't know what that is." "It is directional blood projection. It suggests movement after impact." "I'm not a forensic expert." "You were present." His jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I pushed her?" "I'm asking whether you touched her." "No." "Not to steady her?" "No." "Not during the argument?" "No." Rachel held his gaze. "Then explain the arc." "I can't." "Because it contradicts a simple collapse." He shifted again. "You're building something out of nothing." Rachel remained steady. "Why send the text at 12:10? I told you." "I wanted to see if she'd calm down." "You were physically inside the building at that time." He hesitated. "I sent it from the hallway." "Why?" "So there would be a record." "A record of what?" "That I reached out." "For her." "Or for yourself?" He did not answer. Rachel shifted to logistics. "You re-entered the building 2 days after her death." His eyes lifted sharply. "I came to collect some things." "You submitted a maintenance request to repaint the kitchen wall." "I didn't submit anything." "The request lists your name." Silence. "I might have mentioned the stain. It was traumatic for everyone." "You are not a tenant." "I was close to her." "You were no longer a beneficiary on her financial accounts." The shift was visible now. Minimal, but present. She changed that. 2 weeks before her death. Marcus swallowed. Rachel let the information sit between them. "Did you know before the argument?" He did not respond. She continued evenly. The blood beneath that paint layer remains. His breathing altered. Subtle. She did not raise her voice. When someone bleeds and their head is moved laterally during active hemorrhage, a projected arc forms. That arc was measured at approximately 4 feet, 9 inches. No reaction. Elena's height was 5 feet, 6 inches. Marcus looked down at his hands. Accidental falls produce vertical pooling, Rachel said. This was not vertical. He inhaled slowly. I tried to help her. Rachel did not interrupt. She slipped. He continued. I grabbed her. She hit the edge. It happened fast. You told us you never touched her. I panicked. You left. I thought she'd wake up. You did not call for medical assistance. She told me to get out. She could not have spoken if unconscious. He closed his eyes briefly. That's not what I meant. Rachel leaned back. Which part isn't what you meant? Silence. He stared at the wall. I didn't mean to hurt her, he said quietly. Intent would be evaluated later. Sequence mattered now. You held her while she was bleeding? Rachel said. He did not deny it. You moved her head. He said nothing. You left at 12:20. 8. Silence. Elena was pronounced at 1:03. He swallowed. If you had called at 12:15 instead of leaving, paramedics would have arrived before 12:30. He closed his eyes again. Time settled into the room. No raised voices, no dramatic confession, just arithmetic. Rachel gathered the photograph slowly. We will be submitting additional forensic requests, she said. Marcus remained seated. Am I being charged? Not today. She stood. As she exited, she did not look back. In the hallway, she reviewed the interview audio. He had moved from absence to presence, from no contact to attempted assistance, from accident to panic. Every revision narrowed the gap between fall and force. Back in her office, she overlaid the timeline again. 11:57, vehicle entry. 12:10, text sent. 12:20, 8 vehicle exit. 12:30, 4 emergency call placed by neighbor. 6 minutes between departure and reported impact. Enough time for a body to settle fully. Not enough time for someone driving away to return unnoticed, which meant the impact likely occurred before departure, which meant the thud the neighbor heard may have been secondary, perhaps the final collapse. Rachel reopened the autopsy notes. Estimated survival after fracture variable. Potentially several minutes depending on hemorrhage rate. Elena may have been alive when Marcus walked away. That variable changed the classification entirely. Before this case moves further, consider what panic looks like. Panic calls for help. Panic does not schedule repainting. Panic does not construct timestamps. Rachel prepared the warrant for full forensic reanalysis of preserved materials, clothing fibers, fingernail scrapings, and paint sampling beneath the new coat. The case had been labeled accidental. But accidents do not require concealment. Concealment is action. And action leaves sequence. Sequence leaves evidence. And evidence does not disappear simply because a file was closed in 48 hours. The warrant was signed before sunrise. Limited scope. Re-examination of preserved biological evidence. Extraction of layered paint from the kitchen wall. Comparative DNA analysis against Marcus Hale's voluntary sample. Forensic reconstruction authorization. No arrest order. Not yet. Rachel Monroe arrived at the lab before the day shift briefing concluded. Evidence lockers were opened under dual verification. Original seals intact. That detail mattered. If contamination had occurred after closure, the defense would argue procedural compromise. If not, the chain would hold. Elena Vance's clothing was unwrapped carefully. Dark blouse, denim skirt, one heel. Trace bag contained fingernail scrapings. Rachel focused first on the blouse. Magnify collar seam. She instructed. Under high resolution imaging, subtle distortion appeared along the left neckline. The fibers were compressed inward, not outward. Pressure applied from the exterior. How much force? Rachel asked. Enough for a firm grip? The analyst replied. Not necessarily violent, but directional. Directional. The word aligned with the arc. They swabbed the collar interior for touch DNA. Then the fingernail scrapings were processed again, this time with expanded sensitivity thresholds. Original analysis had labeled trace male DNA as insufficient for reporting. Rachel requested the raw allele data. The comparison with Marcus Hale's voluntary sample ran for several minutes. Match probability displayed on the monitor. Consistent contributor. Not exclusive proof of homicide, but proof of physical contact near the time of death. Rachel nodded once. Document it. Next, paint. Maintenance records confirmed the wall had been repainted 48 hours after the incident. Requested verbally by Marcus Hale. Approved without tenant verification. Technicians carefully removed a narrow section of baseboard trim to expose layered drywall paint beneath the fresh coat. Chemical reagent was applied. The reaction was immediate. Darkening in a curved band beneath the top layer. The same geometry as the photographed arc. Blood residue preserved under new paint. Rachel photographed the reaction personally. Timestamped. Logged. Chain confirmed. The wall had not been cleaned. It had been concealed. Back in her office, Rachel reconstructed the sequence again, this time with confirmed variables. Marcus present inside the building. Physical grip evidenced by fiber compression. Male DNA beneath Elena's fingernails. Directional blood projection inconsistent with passive fall. Post-incident return. Repaint request. She called the medical examiner. With confirmed lateral projection during active hemorrhage. Rachel said, "Does manner of death remain accidental?" The examiner paused. If movement occurred during active bleeding and external force contributed to head positioning, that indicates third-party involvement. Manner would shift to homicide pending prosecutorial determination. That was enough. Rachel updated internal classification. Accidental, superseded. Active homicide review. At 11:14 that morning, Marcus Hale received notification the case status had changed. At 11:40, he contacted legal counsel. At 12:02, traffic cameras captured his vehicle entering the expressway leading out of the city. Rachel had anticipated movement. A hold order had already been circulated. Uniformed officers intercepted his vehicle at a toll plaza approximately 12 miles from downtown. He did not resist. He looked confused, as if the wall was not supposed to speak again. Back in interrogation, Marcus no longer leaned back casually. His hands were flat on the table, shoulders slightly hunched. Rachel entered with a single photograph. The chemical reaction beneath paint. "This is beneath the layer you requested," she said evenly. Marcus stared at it. "I didn't kill her. You moved her." Silence. "You held her head while she was bleeding." He looked away. "She slipped," he said quietly. "I grabbed her. She hit the edge. You denied touching her. I panicked. You left. I thought she'd wake up. You sent a text to create distance. That's not why. Then why send it while inside the building?" He did not respond. Rachel shifted slightly. "Elena removed you as beneficiary 2 weeks before her death." His jaw tightened. "She told me that night," he said, "and she said we were done. And you grabbed her." She pulled away. Hard enough to fracture her skull. It wasn't supposed to happen. Intent would be argued later. Sequence was clear now. Argument, physical contact, impact. Bleeding. Head repositioned. Arc formed. Departure. Repaint. You returned 2 days later. Rachel continued. "Why? I couldn't stand the stain. Or the evidence." Silence. He closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't mean for her to die." Rachel leaned back. "You left her alive." He flinched. Autopsy revision had confirmed it. Survival window after fracture several minutes possible before irreversible collapse. If Marcus exited at 12:28 and the emergency call occurred at 12:34, Elena could have remained alive during that gap. Alive and unattended. "You walked away," Rachel said. He did not deny it. The prosecutor entered later that afternoon. Charges were filed: voluntary manslaughter, obstruction of evidence, failure to render aid. Marcus Hale signed the acknowledgement without looking up. Rachel returned to her office. The original intake summary lay open on her desk. Scene consistent with fall. She highlighted the phrase again. Consistency without measurement had nearly ended the case. If the arc had been overlooked entirely, if the wall had been sanded instead of painted, this file would have remained closed. Before this case moves further, consider the margin between accident and homicide. It is rarely spectacle. It is geometry. Gravity moves downward. Interference moves sideways. The arc had moved sideways. Rachel saved the updated classification in the system. The file status changed visibly on screen. Closed. Accidental. Now replaced with active. Homicide. 3 weeks earlier, the case ended in 48 hours. Now it had begun properly, because someone had been close enough to Elena Vance to hold her while she bled, and then close enough to return and erase it. Walls remember, even under paint. The arraignment lasted less than 10 minutes. Marcus Hale stood in a pressed suit that no longer carried the confidence of voluntary interviews. Charges were read clearly: voluntary manslaughter, obstruction of evidence, failure to render aid. Bail was denied. He did not look toward the gallery. Elena Vance's sister sat in the second row, hands folded, expression controlled, grief recalibrated into something quieter and sharper. Rachel Monroe remained near the back wall of the courtroom. She did not watch Marcus. She watched the prosecutor. Because the strength of a case is not in emotion, it is in sequence. Back at the precinct, the defense's strategy began to take shape. No intent to kill. No weapon. No history of violence. Alcohol involved. Mutual argument escalated. Panic, not malice. Rachel did not dispute panic. She disputed abandonment. The prosecution's burden would not hinge solely on force. It would hinge on what happened after force. She requested a formal forensic reconstruction session. The lab converted measurements from the apartment into scaled modeling software. Island height. Wall distance. Elena's height. Impact angle. 2 primary scenarios were simulated. Scenario 1: Elena stumbles independently, strikes marble edge, collapses immediately. Output showed downward pooling and minor passive satellite droplets. No lateral arc formation. Scenario 2: external force applied to upper torso or collar. Rotational pivot toward island. Impact. Continued upright support for several seconds while head orientation shifts laterally during active bleeding. Projected arc formed at approximately 4 feet, 9 inches. The curvature aligned with original photograph and chemical conformation beneath paint. The analyst printed side-by-side comparisons. Rachel studied them carefully. Geometry is not opinion. Geometry is limitation. The defense retained their own expert. Their position: Elena could have struck the marble, staggered upright briefly, and turned her own head during disorientation, creating the arc without third-party assistance. Rachel reviewed the autopsy again. Depressed fracture depth indicated significant force, enough to impair immediate motor coordination. The probability of independent upright stabilization after such impact was low. She contacted the medical examiner directly. Could Elena have remained standing for several seconds unassisted after this fracture? Highly unlikely. The examiner replied. Loss of balance would be immediate or near immediate. And purposeful head turning. With that injury, motor control would be severely compromised. That testimony would matter. Rachel assembled a consolidated timeline exhibit for court. 11:57 Marcus enters garage. 12:10 see text message sent. Approximately 12:15 estimated impact window. 12:28 vehicle exits garage. 12:30 4 emergency call placed by neighbor. 103 pronouncement. She added one additional overlay. Estimated survivability after injury several minutes, which meant Elena Vance may have been alive when Marcus left the building. Failure to render aid would not be theoretical. It would be documented. During pretrial hearing, the defense argued the text message was unrelated to staging. Marcus claimed he sent it impulsively. Rachel countered with location data. Phone signal triangulation, expanded beyond standard logs, indicated his device remained within the building footprint at the moment the message was sent. He had not texted from the road. He had texted from inside the structure. The prosecutor framed it clearly. Metzeter. Hale constructed digital distance before creating physical distance. The judge allowed the data into record. Next came the repainting. Maintenance request timestamped 48 hours after death. Submitted under Marcus's name. Approved without tenant verification. Defense argument: emotional distress. He could not bear seeing the stain. Prosecution response: if the death was truly accidental, repainting was unnecessary before investigative clearance. Rachel's testimony was procedural. She described the arc. She described the chemical conformation beneath paint. She described fiber compression at collar. She described DNA consistency under fingernails. She described the absence of emergency call from Marcus. She did not speculate. She did not dramatize. She described sequence. During cross-examination, defense counsel asked, "Detective Monroe, is it possible Ms. Vance struck her head without Mr. Hale intending harm?"
Yes.
Rachel answered evenly. Intent to kill is not required for manslaughter. And is it possible he panicked?
Yes.
And panic causes irrational behavior. Panic does not require repainting a wall. Silence followed. The courtroom remained quiet. Rachel recognized something in Marcus during testimony. Not calculation. Not cold detachment. Something closer to denial. The belief that if the surface looked clean, the conclusion would remain clean. After the hearing, the prosecutor approached Rachel in the hallway. "Hale plead," she said quietly. "Why?" Rachel asked. "Because the ARC doesn't argue." 2 weeks later, plea negotiations began formally. Marcus's attorney requested reduction to negligent homicide. The prosecution refused. Voluntary manslaughter with obstruction. Evidence was stable. Digital alibi dismantled. Physical contact confirmed. Blood ARC validated. Post-incident concealment documented. Marcus agreed. In chambers, before formal entry, he made one statement. "I didn't think she would die." Rachel listened without expression. "Not thinking is not the same as not causing," she replied. He signed the agreement. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Back at her office, Rachel updated the case board. Elena Vance, status plea entered. She paused before removing the file from active column. Across the board, another file remained pinned beneath a red tab. Her unresolved case. Years old. No ARC, no repaint. Just absence. She looked at it briefly, then returned to Elena's file. Sequence had been restored here. The original 48-hour closure had almost finalized a different narrative. Alcohol slip, impact, accident. But gravity does not send text messages. Gravity does not request maintenance. Gravity does not return to repaint a wall. Before this case moves further, consider what differentiates tragedy from crime. It is not always intent. It is choice. Marcus Hale made choices after the fracture. He chose not to call. He chose to leave. He chose to conceal. Those choices reclassified the fall. And they ensured that what closed in 48 hours would not remain closed. Sentencing would follow. But the case had already shifted from appearance to record. Because once motion is measured, it cannot be explained away. Sentencing began at 9 in the morning. The courtroom was quieter than during the hearing. Fewer observers. No press presence beyond a single local reporter seated in the back row. Marcus Hale stood when instructed. 12 years recommended. Voluntary manslaughter. Obstruction of evidence. Failure to render aid merged into sentencing consideration. The judge reviewed impact statements first. Elena Vance's sister approached the podium without notes. "She called me that night," she said. "She said she was finally done." She sounded steady. Not drunk. Not confused. Just certain. Rachel watched Marcus's posture shift slightly at that detail. The sister continued. "If he had called for help instead of leaving, I might still have my sister." She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She returned to her seat. The judge summarized the sequence as established through plea, argument, physical contact, impact, failure to summon aid, post-incident concealment. 12 years. The judge said, "Credit for time served." The gavel struck once. Marcus did not look at the gallery. He looked at the floor. Resolution in court rarely feels dramatic. It feels procedural. Rachel left before reporters began forming outside. At the precinct, she reopened the original intake report. Scene consistent with fall. She read it again, this time not as criticism, but as analysis. Why had it seemed consistent? No forced entry. No weapon. Alcohol visible. Body near hard surface. Those factors bias interpretation toward accident. Cognitive shortcuts close files efficiently. But efficiency without secondary verification is vulnerability. Rachel drafted a procedural memo that afternoon. Subject: Verification Protocol for Unattended Head Trauma Fatalities. Recommendation 1. Mandatory measurement of any directional blood projection inconsistent with gravity. 2. Independent confirmation before repainting or surface alteration within 30 days of death. 3. Expanded digital triangulation review when intimate partners are interviewed. She forwarded it to the captain. The reply came within the hour. Approved for internal review. Correction, when documented, prevents repetition. Later that week, Rachel requested random audit of 2 previously closed accidental fall cases from the past 3 years. Case 1, elderly male in bathroom. Clear vertical pooling. Multiple contact bruises consistent with tile descent. No repainting. Closure confirmed appropriate. Case 2, 34-year-old male found near kitchen counter. Alcohol present. Closed within 72 hours. Rachel studied the photographs. There, faintly visible near backsplash tile, was a small smear partially obscured by lighting glare. She enlarged it. No immediate arc, but a lateral distortion within the pool's edge. Not enough to reclassify. Enough to re-examine. She flagged it for secondary lab review. Correcting one case sharpens perception in others. That evening, Rachel returned to Elena's apartment building one final time. The unit had been repainted entirely. New tenants scheduled to move in within the week. The kitchen wall looked uniform. Clean. Ordinary, she stood where the arc had once been. Measured again from floor upward. 4 feet 9 inches. Measurement anchors memory. She imagined the sequence once more, not to relive it, but to ensure it remained factual. Argument escalating. Financial severance revealed. Physical grip at collar. Rotational pivot. Impact at marble edge. Active hemorrhage. Head repositioned. Arc forming. Release. Collapse. Text message sent. Engine started. Wall repainted. Then corrected. Elena Vance had been alive for several minutes after the fracture. The medical examiner confirmed survivability window was plausible. Marcus Hale left within that window. That fact altered everything. Without that gap, the case might have been negligent homicide. With that gap, it became abandonment layered with concealment. Before this case moves further, consider the narrow window between injury and outcome. Minutes matter. Silence matters. Choice matters. Back at her desk, Rachel finalized the supplemental report. Initial classification error stemmed from reliance on visible surface condition without secondary geometric analysis. Reclassification supported by confirmed lateral projection beneath repainted surface, fiber compression consistent with grip, digital timeline contradiction, and defendant admission of contact. She saved the document. Case status updated closed. Conviction entered. The board in her office shifted slightly lighter as Elena's file moved from active to archive. Across the board, her unresolved past case remained pinned beneath a red marker. Different facts. Different silence. No arc to measure. No repaint to scrape. Just absence. She stood for a moment before turning off the lights. Elena's wall had been repainted. Her story had not. The case had closed once in 48 hours. It closed again now, correctly. Because gravity leaves one pattern. Interference leaves another. And someone had finally taken the time to measure the difference. 3 months after sentencing, the Internal Review Board issued its summary. Not a press release. Not a public apology. A procedural correction. The board concluded that the original classification of Elena Vance's death as accidental resulted from premature closure without full geometric analysis of blood evidence and insufficient digital timeline verification. No disciplinary action was taken. Instead, protocol was amended. Sometimes correction does not punish. It adjusts. Rachel Monroe sat at the end of the long conference table as the captain reviewed the updated guidelines. All unattended head trauma fatalities inside private residences require documented measurement of directional blood patterns. He read, any repainting, surface replacement, or structural alteration within 30 days of incident requires independent forensic clearance. The room remained quiet. No one argued, because the evidence had not argued. After the meeting, one patrol sergeant approached Rachel. How did you even see it? He asked. The arc, she replied. Yes, it didn't align, she said. He waited for elaboration. It moved sideways, she added. He nodded slowly. Gravity does not move sideways. That became the simplest version of the lesson. Back in her office, Rachel reopened the chemical reaction photograph one final time. The darkened curve beneath fresh paint, preserved by concealment. If Marcus had sanded the wall instead of painting over it, the residue might have been destroyed. If maintenance had replaced the drywall entirely, The arc would have been gone. The case would have remained closed. 48 hours. Accident. File archived. Sequence erased. But concealment is rarely perfect, and geometry is rarely forgiving. She pulled the data logs from Marcus's phone one more time. At 12:10, while still inside the building, he sent, "Are you still up?" A message designed to imply distance. Distance designed to imply absence. Absence designed to imply innocence. But the garage camera placed him inside. The tower triangulation placed his device within the building footprint. The blood beneath paint placed his hands near her face. Sequence overrode narrative. Later that evening, Rachel visited the archive room. Elena's file now carried a final label closed. Conviction entered. The original accidental ruling remained in system history, marked superseded. Rachel did not delete it. Error recorded prevents repetition. Across the archive shelf, she noticed another file she had flagged earlier during random audit. The 34-year-old male near the kitchen counter. She pulled it again. Photographs displayed on screen. The smear along backsplash tile. Subtle. Ambiguous. She measured. Not enough to reclassify yet, but enough to warrant luminal testing on retained samples. Correction breeds vigilance. Before leaving for the night, Rachel paused at her case board. Pinned beneath a red tab was her unresolved past case. Years old. No repaint. No arc. Just a body found in an empty warehouse and a timeline that never aligned. She studied it briefly. Some cases close because evidence disappears. Some remain open because it never existed. Elena's case had nearly become the former. It survived because someone looked long enough at a wall. If you have followed this case from the beginning, consider what almost happened. A young woman dies. Alcohol present. Hard surface nearby. No witness. Case closed. It would have been remembered as misfortune, not as abandonment, not as concealed movement, not as a head turned while blood was still flowing. Marcus Hale did not intend to kill her. The court accepted that, but he intended to leave. He intended to repaint. He intended to preserve himself. Intent is layered. Responsibility is cumulative. Rachel shut down the monitor. The city outside moved without awareness of arcs or measurements. Inside the precinct, the new protocol was already circulating in digital briefings. Future scenes would be measured. Future walls would be verified before paint covered them. Elena Vance had been alive for minutes after her fracture. Minutes that could have altered outcome. Minutes that defined the charge. The difference between accident and homicide, in this case, was not spectacle. It was sequence. It was geometry. It was choice. Rachel turned off the office light and closed the door behind her. One arc had been read correctly. One convenient conclusion had been replaced with record. The next case would not announce itself either. It would sit in photographs, in timestamps, in something that does not align. And someone would have to notice. Correction does not end with conviction. It begins with audit. 2 weeks after the internal protocol update circulated, Rachel Monroe requested a quiet compliance review. Not a formal investigation. Not a disciplinary inquiry. A pattern check. She filtered unattended head trauma fatalities from the past 5 years. Private residences only. Alcohol present in at least half. The list narrowed. 12 cases. She selected 3 at random. Case 1 had already been reviewed. Confirmed accidental. Case 2 remained pending secondary luminal testing. Case 3 drew her attention immediately. 38-year-old female. Found at base of staircase inside townhouse. Husband reported hearing a fall from the kitchen. Alcohol present in toxicology. Case closed within 72 hours. Rachel opened the scene photographs. Staircases produce complex blood patterns. Multiple impact points. Directional drops consistent with descent. This one did. But there was something else. On the adjacent hallway wall near the base of the stairs was a faint smear, horizontal, narrow. Not arc-shaped, but lateral. She enlarged the image. The smear terminated abruptly, as if interrupted. The original report described it as transfer from paramedic contact. No measurement documented. No secondary confirmation. Rachel checked maintenance records. The hallway had been repainted 5 days after the incident. Requested by the husband. Approved without delay. She leaned back slowly. Pattern recognition is not accusation. It is inquiry. She did not jump to reclassification. She requested preserved evidence review first. If nothing aligned, the case would remain closed. If something did align, a different conversation would begin. The lab confirmed trace samples from the staircase wall had been retained in sealed evidence. Rachel authorized luminal reapplication. While waiting, she reviewed the husband's original statement. He reported hearing a thud. He found his wife at the base of the stairs. He did not call immediately. He attempted to help her up. Time between reported fall and emergency call approximately 7 minutes. Rachel underlined that detail. 7 minutes. Delay. Delay alone is not proof, but delay paired with concealment is pattern. The lab call came later that afternoon. Luminal reacted along the retained wall sample. The reaction followed a short lateral sweep before terminating, not consistent with vertical descent alone. Rachel requested full reanalysis. She did not feel triumph. She felt caution. Every reopened case carries consequences. Families relive grief, reputation shifts, but accuracy outweighs comfort. Back at her desk, she compared Elena's arc and this new smear side by side. Different geometry, different environment, same principle. Gravity pulls down, interference moves sideways. She documented findings and forwarded them to the captain with a recommendation. Reclassify as under review pending further analysis. Within the hour, approval was granted. Rachel understood the weight of that decision. One corrected case had sharpened perception. But vigilance must not become bias. Each case must stand independently. That night, she returned home later than usual. Her unresolved past case file lay on her kitchen table, something she rarely allowed. She opened it again. Warehouse. Single gunshot. No forced entry. No weapon recovered. No repaint. No arc. Just absence of alignment. Elena's case had been about visible contradiction. This one was about invisible sequence. She closed the file. Not tonight. Back at the precinct the next morning, the stairwell case officially shifted from closed accidental to active review. The husband was contacted for follow-up questioning. His reaction mirrored Marcus Hale's first response: surprise, then defensiveness, then recalibration. Rachel prepared her questions carefully. She would not accuse, she would measure. Because the lesson from Elena Vance was not suspicion, it was patience. Measure the wall, measure the timeline, measure the silence. Before this case moves further, consider what changes when protocol shifts. It is not dramatic reform. It is one additional look at a photograph, one additional chemical test, one additional question about why paint was requested. Elena Vance's arc had altered procedure. Procedure was now altering other files. Correction is cumulative. Rachel pinned the stairwell case onto her active board. 2 arcs, 2 walls, 2 delays before emergency calls. The system had nearly missed the first. It would not miss the second. And somewhere beyond these files, her unresolved warehouse case remained unchanged. No arc, no repaint. Just a timeline that still refused to align. Some cases are solved by noticing what should not be there. Others are solved by noticing what should be there but is not. Elena's wall had spoken because someone listened. The next one would require the same discipline. Because once you learn how to read motion, you cannot ignore it again. The stairwell case did not collapse under scrutiny. It resisted, which made it different from Elena Vance's. The retained wall sample from the townhouse hallway had reacted under luminol, but the pattern was shorter, less defined. No clean arc, no sweeping curvature, just a lateral smear that interrupted the vertical descent pattern. Rachel Monroe stood inside the townhouse 2 weeks after reopening. The hallway had been repainted. Neutral color, even finish. The staircase descended 12 steps to a hardwood landing. The original photographs showed blood drops on steps consistent with downward motion. Gravity had done its work. But at the base, where the victim's head had come to rest, the pool expanded outward. Then slightly sideways along the adjacent wall, Rachel measured from floor to the original smear location using documented photo scaling. 3 feet, 11 inches, lower than Elena's arc. Different mechanics. She reconstructed the husband's statement again. He claimed he heard a fall while washing dishes. He found his wife unconscious. He attempted to lift her. She slipped from his grasp. He panicked. He called after realizing she was unresponsive. Time between reported impact and emergency call, approximately 7 minutes. 7 minutes in a domestic interior is long enough to make decisions. The autopsy report indicated blunt force trauma to occipital region, back of skull, consistent with backward fall. But there was also a contusion on the left upper arm, documented as possible stair impact. Rachel re-examined the image. The contusion pattern was oval, grip-shaped. She requested fiber testing from the retained clothing. Unlike Elena's case, this one contained no prior romantic conflict record, no financial beneficiary change, no text message anomalies, which meant the only leverage point was physical geometry. The lab results returned 2 days later. Fiber distortion present along upper sleeve consistent with compression. Not definitive, but consistent. Rachel scheduled a voluntary interview with the husband. He arrived cooperative. He expressed confusion. "I already told the officers what happened," he said. Rachel did not argue. "Walk me through the 7 minutes before you called," she replied. He described lifting her shoulders, attempting to rouse her, believing she would wake up, realizing she would not. "Did you move her head?" Rachel asked. "I tried to support it." "Against the wall?" "I don't remember." Memory gaps often align with liability. Rachel did not accuse. She described the smear. "Your wife struck the stairs," she said. "But there is lateral transfer at the base inconsistent with descent alone." He frowned. "I was holding her." "How?" "Under her arms." "Did her head contact the wall while you held her?" "I don't know." "Did you shake her?" "No." "Did you reposition her before calling emergency services?" Silence. "I might have." Rachel allowed the silence to extend. Unlike Marcus Hale, this man showed no evidence of concealment after the fact. No repaint request initiated directly by him, though he had approved it. No digital alibi constructed. No beneficiary shift. But the delay remained. 7 minutes. Rachel requested emergency dispatch audio. At the beginning of the call, the husband's breathing was heavy. Dispatcher asked, "When did this happen?" He responded, "Just now." Timestamp contradicted that. The impact likely occurred 7 minutes earlier. Small lie. Small gap. Rachel reviewed medical examiner notes again. Survival window after occipital fracture could vary. Immediate unconsciousness likely. Respiration may persist briefly. If aid had been summoned immediately, outcome uncertain. Delay could matter. But delay alone is not homicide. Rachel weighed the difference between this case and Elena's. Elena had an arc formed while upright and bleeding. Elena had concealment. Elena had digital staging. Elena had admission of grip during argument. This case had lateral transfer during attempted assistance. Delay before call. Possible minimization. The distinction mattered. Rachel met with the prosecutor privately. "Do you believe this rises to criminal negligence?" The prosecutor asked. "Not yet." Rachel answered. "Then what are we looking at?" "Clarity." The prosecutor nodded. Rachel returned to the townhouse for one final reconstruction. She positioned a weighted mannequin at the top of the staircase and simulated a backward fall. Blood analog fluid flowed downward across steps. At the base, she manually lifted the mannequin's torso and repositioned slightly toward the wall. A lateral smear formed at roughly the same height as documented sample. Not arc-shaped, not controlled. Transfer. Consistent with attempted lifting. Gravity plus assistance, not gravity plus assault. Rachel documented the reconstruction thoroughly. When she updated the file, she wrote, "Evidence suggests post-impact repositioning consistent with attempted aid. No indicators of pre-impact external force identified at this stage." The case was reclassified from homicide review back to accidental with clarifying notation. Correction works both directions. Not every lateral mark signals crime. Not every delay signals intent. The difference lies in sequence and motive. Before this case moves further, consider the danger of overcorrection. Once you learn to see sideways motion, you may begin to suspect it everywhere. Discipline is not suspicion, it is verification. Elena Vance's case required reopening. The stairwell case required confirmation. Rachel removed the stairwell file from active board and returned it to archive with updated documentation. One arc had revealed concealment. One smear revealed assistance. Geometry alone does not convict. Context completes it. Back at her desk, Rachel stared briefly at her unresolved warehouse case file again. No arc, no repaint. Just a body and a gunshot and a timeline that still did not align. She closed the folder. Some cases speak loudly through pattern. Others remain silent. Elena's had nearly remained silent. It did not. Because someone measured the wall, and because someone understood that gravity moves downward, interference moves sideways, and assistance leaves a different mark than anger. The difference must always be measured. The stairwell case returned to archive with amended notation. Clarified. Measured. Documented. Not criminal. That mattered. Correction is not about finding guilt everywhere. It is about ensuring that guilt, when present, is not mislabeled as misfortune. Rachel Monroe closed the stairwell file and allowed herself exactly 1 minute of stillness before reaching for the next task. Because something had been quietly unresolved in Elena Vance's case. Not legally. Procedurally. She reopened the emergency dispatch audio again. Neighbor call at 12:34. Heavy thud reported. No shouting. No argument overheard. Just impact. But the medical examiner's revised timeline suggested the fatal fracture likely occurred before Marcus Hale exited the building at 12:28, which meant the thud at 12:32 might not have been the initial strike. Rachel replayed the body camera footage once more, frame by frame. At minute 2 and 13 seconds, as a paramedic shifted position, a faint secondary blood drip appeared slightly beyond the main pool. Not documented. Small, but separated. If the primary impact occurred earlier, what produced the sound the neighbor heard? Rachel reconstructed possibilities. 1. Delayed full-body collapse after partial support. 2. Object falling after Marcus left. 3. Secondary head contact with floor during final seizure activity. She reviewed autopsy notes again. There was no secondary fracture, which reduced probability of second head impact. She returned to building surveillance. Marcus's vehicle exited at 12:28. Garage ramp acoustics could amplify engine noise, but the neighbor described a heavy thud, not engine. Rachel contacted the neighbor for follow-up clarification. He agreed to speak. "I heard something heavy," he said. "Like furniture tipping. Did you hear voices before that?" Rachel asked. "No." "Did you hear a door slam?" "Not that I remember." "Could the sound have been delayed? Something falling after movement?" "I suppose." Rachel paused. "Did you check the time immediately?" "No. I looked at my phone when I called." Dispatch log timestamp, 12:34. If the thud occurred closer to 12:33, Marcus was already in his vehicle, which suggested the impact the neighbor heard might have been Elena's body fully settling after initial injury, meaning the fracture likely occurred before departure, which reinforced abandonment. But Rachel wanted certainty. She returned to the lab for a controlled acoustic test, using building layout data and approximate distances. Technicians simulated weighted object drops inside a similar concrete, floored environment. A controlled drop from waist height produced a deep resonance through shared wall consistent with what the neighbor described. A body collapsing from partial upright support could create that sound. If Marcus had held Elena briefly and released her fully before leaving, the final collapse could have occurred minutes later, which aligned. She documented findings carefully, not because it would alter conviction, but because precision matters even after sentencing. Back at her desk, Rachel reviewed Marcus's final interrogation statement. "I didn't think she would die." She studied the phrasing. Not, "I didn't know she was hurt." Not, "I thought she was fine." "I didn't think she would die." Recognition of injury. Minimization of consequence. The difference is subtle, but language reveals awareness. Rachel added a final analytical note to the file. Defendant acknowledgement of injury severity supports inference of conscious disregard during survivability window. The case was already adjudicated, but documentation ensures clarity for future appellate review. Later that evening, Rachel stood alone in the evidence room again. She reopened the original ARC photograph, zoomed in. There was something almost mathematical about it. A curved line where gravity should have drawn vertical streaks. A deviation from expectation. That deviation had shifted classification. She printed the image and placed it into the updated training binder. No names attached. Just geometry and a caption. Deviation from gravitational pattern. Verify before closure. Before this case moves further, consider how small the difference was. A thin curve. A few inches of lateral transfer. 6 minutes of silence. A text message sent inside a building instead of outside. None of it dramatic. All of it decisive. Rachel pinned the training binder closed and returned it to the conference shelf. The procedural amendment had already circulated to patrol units. New cases would be measured. New walls would be verified. Elena Vance's file would remain in archive not as error, but as instruction. Back in her office, the unresolved warehouse case remained pinned beneath red tab. Years old. No blood arc. No repaint. No delay to measure. Just a gunshot and a timeline gap between 2 security cameras. Rachel stared at it. Some cases demand attention because something moves sideways. Others demand attention because something is missing entirely. Elena's case had taught the department to measure deviation. Her unresolved case would require measuring absence. She turned off the overhead light. The precinct quieted around her. 48 hours had nearly defined Elena Vance's story. Now the record reflected something different. She had been alive after the fracture. Alive after the argument. Alive after he left. For minutes. Minutes that mattered. And a wall that refused to lie. One more block remained. Not to reopen the case, but to close it properly. The file was complete. Not closed once. Closed correctly. Rachel Monroe sat alone in the briefing room the night the training module officially went live across the department network. Slide 1 displayed a neutral kitchen wall. Slide 2 displayed a thin curved arc. Slide 3 displayed the caption. Measure deviation before concluding fall. No names. No case number. No drama. Just instruction. Elena Vance would not be remembered publicly for the arc on her wall. But inside the department, that arc would exist as correction. Rachel powered down the projector and returned to her office. The city outside moved with its usual indifference. Traffic flowing, lights shifting, lives unfolding without awareness of geometry or sequence. Inside the system, a single misclassification had reshaped procedure. 48 hours had nearly finalized the wrong narrative. Alcohol. Marble edge. Tragic slip. The ease of that explanation had been its strength and its danger. Rachel reopened the digital case summary one last time. Timeline reconstructed, argument, grip at collar, rotational pivot, impact against marble edge, active hemorrhage, head repositioned, lateral projection, release, collapse, text message sent inside building, departure at 12:28, final body settlement heard at approximately 12:32, emergency call placed at 12:34, pronouncement at 1:03, survivability window present between fracture and abandonment. She read the final sentencing notation again. Voluntary manslaughter. Obstruction of evidence. Failure to render aid. The law had accounted for force. But the weight of the case rested on something quieter. He left. He returned to repaint. He tried to reduce motion to gravity. Rachel closed the summary. Across the room, her unresolved warehouse case file remained pinned beneath a red tab. Years earlier, a body on cold concrete. Single gunshot wound. 2 security cameras with a gap between frames. No weapon recovered. No arc, no repaint. Just missing sequence. She stood and walked toward it. For a moment, she imagined what deviation would look like there. A misaligned timestamp. A shadow in reflection. A door that opened but did not register. Some cases are solved because something is present that should not be. Others are solved because something absent should have been there. Elena Vance's case had been the first type. The warehouse case remained the second. Rachel returned to her desk and drafted one final notation in Elena's file. Case review demonstrates necessity of measuring directional deviation and verifying post-incident alterations prior to administrative closure. 48-hour resolution insufficient when geometric inconsistency present. She saved it. Archived. Permanent. Before this episode closes, consider what nearly happened. A young woman dies in her kitchen. Alcohol visible. Hard surface nearby. No forced entry. No weapon. Case closed. No one would have questioned it again. Her sister would have mourned an accident. Marcus Hale would have lived with a private memory. The wall would have remained clean. But blood does not curve without motion. And motion does not occur without cause. If you examine scenes the way this one was examined initially, you will see what appears obvious. If you measure them, You may see what resists alignment. Gravity moves downward. Interference moves sideways. Delay changes outcome. Repaint conceals. Text messages timestamp intention. Minutes define liability. Elena Vance was alive for minutes after the fracture. Alive while Marcus Hale chose distance over assistance. Those minutes reclassified the fall. Those minutes turned an accident into a crime. Rachel turned off her desk lamp. The precinct settled into night shift rhythm. On her board, Elena's name was gone from active column. In archive, it remained as instruction. Across the room, the warehouse file still waited. Sequence unresolved. Alignment incomplete. The next case would not announce itself loudly either. It would hide inside something small. A measurement. A timestamp. A deviation no wider than a thin curve on drywall. If you have followed this investigation, carry one thing forward. Do not close a file because it looks clean. Measure it. Because sometimes the difference between accident and homicide is not violence. It is motion. And whether someone chooses to look long enough to see it,